State Representative Jim Struzzi on the line with us from Harrisburg, where it's been a very, very busy and active week. Lots of things to talk about with him this morning. Our visit presented by Marcus & Mack, voted Best Law Firm and Best Personal Injury Lawyer 4 years in a row in the Best of Indiana County contest. Visit them online at marcusandmack.com. Representative Struzzi, good morning.
Good morning, Todd. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad that you're here with us today. We got a lot to talk about. I want to start not with the budget, which we might expect, but I want to start with yesterday's vote on the minimum wage in Pennsylvania, because, for a lot of folks, they're not understanding what's going on with this. The proposal was to actually double, according to what I'm reading, double what is the current minimum wage in Pennsylvania. And there are a lot of different considerations, many of them quite political. Tell me how you voted and why this thing did not pass.
Well, I think part of the problem, and this is several times now in the past year or so, a couple of years, we've seen this minimum wage bill come through. It's really not a bill that's thought thoroughly through, I don't think. Jumping it straight up to $15 an hour, I think is quite a leap. And when you look at the impacts, understanding that, it's obviously a political issue. I think that the motivation to run it yesterday was clearly that the governor highlighted the increase in minimum wage as part of his budget address on Tuesday. But I think what isn't taken into account is the impact on our small businesses. And the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the PA Chamber, they all oppose this type of dramatic leap in the minimum wage because they understand the impact that it's going to have on small businesses. It's going to have an impact on consumers. It's going to have an impact on how much you pay for a cheeseburger or a hamburger because someone has to absorb the cost of that increase. So I think that's really the major concern is the dramatic leap and then the really unknown impacts on small businesses.
Uh-oh. Did you drop off there? You still there?
Oh, no, I'm still here, Todd.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, one of the interesting things to me about increasing the minimum wage is the effect on those even those businesses that are not paying minimum wage right now. They're paying a little bit higher than minimum wage because the logical progression is that if minimum wage goes up and surpasses what these folks are paying, they're going to want to, I don't know if they can afford to, but they're going to want to raise it commensurately so that if somebody was making more than the minimum wage before, they'll still be making more than the minimum wage before. And that's a tremendous burden on businesses.
Well, it absolutely is. I think it would only be fair that if you're bringing in, say, a starting employee at minimum wage at $15, your employees that have been there for several years would ultimately deserve an increase as well. And I think the other side of it, which I think you kind of touched on there, Todd, is minimum wage isn't meant to be a living wage. It's not meant to be a family-sustaining wage. It's meant to be a starting wage. And typically, the people that are making minimum wage are young people that are single, under 25. And it's meant to motivate you to go out and get an education, to seek a promotion, to do better with your life. It isn't meant to be a $7.25 wage for the rest of your life. And I think that's the other side of it, again, that people fail to realize, and I think our colleagues across the aisle who continue to push this aren't taking into account or choose not to. But I think, as I said earlier, Todd, this is part of the governor's budget address on Tuesday. I'm sure that it would be discussed throughout this budgetary process as one of the negotiation points.
All right, so let's get into the budget address on Tuesday. Of course, it's always going to be contentious when you have two-party system, and certainly the Republican Party looked at what the governor said the other day, and I think there was a large collective shrug of the shoulders and a raising of the eyebrows. It's like, well, this is just like last year.
Well, as I've said to you in the past, I had hoped that the governor would see the light and realize that you cannot continue to spend more than you have, and yet still he comes out with a $53.2 billion spending proposal, well in excess of the $48 billion we expect to collect in revenues in this upcoming fiscal year. So it automatically creates a dilemma for us because we now have a $6.4 billion gap that we have to try and address. And as we saw last year, when the governor did, a very high spending number in his budget proposal, it caused the budget negotiations to drag into November, and we certainly don't want to see that happen again. And it really concerns me because our caucus, our Republican caucus, last year we were able to get rid of the regional greenhouse gas initiative, able to basically force the DEP to do some serious regulatory reforms, some streamlining of permitting, the permitting process, and really try to get our economy back on track. And that's what we're about. We're about creating jobs. We're about helping people improve their lives, earn more money, lower the cost of living, and that's what ultimately these things will do. But it's going to take a little time. But when the governor comes in and he's spending or proposes to spend $53.2 billion, draining our rainy day fund, our budget reserve funds, as he proposes, by $4.6 billion, and then banking on taxes that don't exist like skill games and recreational marijuana, it creates a dilemma. And ultimately what's going to happen if we continue down this path of Shapiro spending plans, we're not going to have any money in reserves. And then when we have to fulfill those obligations, where is that money going to come from? And unfortunately, based on the way this governor has spent these first 4 years of his administration, it's going to fall on the taxpayers. And that is why House Republicans and Senate Republicans have been so adamantly opposed to these increases.
Well, I'm listening to and watching the governor deliver the budget address. I'm sure everybody has their own perspective on the way that he approached it. Feisty might be one way to describe it. Confrontational might be the other way to describe it. He basically laid down the gauntlet before the Republicans and demanded that the Republicans finally step forward and get to work. I found that kind of ironic. I don't know how you looked at it.
I was very disappointed in the budget address, Todd. As you know, I sit very close to the front, in the line of sight to the governor, and he always walks by me and we shake hands before he gives his budget address, which I respect. And I thought his budget address started off with some common ground, talking about workforce development, protecting our children and families, providing for our first responders and law enforcement, and then it took a turn, and clearly he got very pointed, very partisan, which I thought was truly unnecessary, given that we were able to negotiate a budget that had benefits for both sides in the budget this current year. And so I didn't understand why he got so pointed and political, and it was really disappointing to me. I will say that even the tone amongst my House colleagues on both sides of the aisle afterwards, I give my remarks on the floor, and then Chairman Jordan Harris, who is the Democratic Appropriations Chairman, we each have a turn to give our comments. I think we even realize that the tone needs to change, and I thought the governor was sort of off base on his whole presentation, because we are about negotiating. We are about getting everyone in the room, crafting a budget, hopefully before the June 30th deadline, that we understand everybody doesn't get everything that they want. But at the end of the day, we all want to provide what's best for Pennsylvania. And I think the governor really didn't help to set the stage for that.
Was there a lot of, as it seemed to me, a lot of, here's my plan, what's yours, when you've already said what yours is?
I think you're going to find posturing on some of those big issues. As I said, the minimum wage will be one of those points. Education funding, the governor is again proposing a very significant increase in education funding, and I think that everyone agrees that we should fund education, but the question is, are we doing the right things with these millions of dollars that we are dumping into education every year at a time when we're not seeing some of the scores in those struggling schools increasing, when we're seeing the student demographic decrease? So I think those are part of the discussions that we're going to have, and we continue as well to see human services increase. That's 41% of our budget right now goes to human services. So we have to look at ways that we can help provide those services while trying to minimize those costs as well. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And as I always caveat, Todd, as you know, this is the starting point of the budget. And we'll be back here in just a short few weeks to go through our budgetary hearings with the secretaries and agencies through the Appropriations Committee hearings.
State Representative Jim Struzzi with us this morning. Data centers, a big part of the budget address. Pennsylvania is really only at the beginning stages of forming a strategy and addressing all of the different concerns, especially the power supply concerns. Is Governor Shapiro on the right track?
In some ways, I think he is. I think he perhaps misrepresented or wasn't fully aware of how the PUC operates at times, and how some of these energy companies operate. I think that there is a lot of misinformation out there right now about data centers. As you know, we're ground zero for the data centers in Indiana County, but we also know that they're constructing a 4.5 gigawatt gas-fired electric power plant, and that's going to put energy back into the grid. And I do take serious offense with the governor saying that Republicans have used Reggie as an excuse to not talk about energy for these past 6 years, which I pointed out in my floor speech, because that's simply not true. You know, Reggie has been the barricade that has prevented energy production in Pennsylvania, and I think we wouldn't be having these discussions if we allowed those gas-fired electric plants that were proposed for Pennsylvania to come in here. If we didn't shut down coal-fired electric generation around this Commonwealth, we would have the baseload energy we need, and I don't think there would be as much of a concern with the data centers as these people have, because we would have that baseload energy, and we wouldn't be concerned. And you know, it's going to take some time for that to come back, but it will.
I don't know if you've had a chance to look in depth at PJM's statement that they made last week, that big document that they put out. What do you think of PJM's strategy for addressing the energy concerns with data centers in Pennsylvania?
I haven't had a chance to fully dig into that, Todd, but you know, I think the bottom line is that we have to make sure that we are providing the energy that if the data centers, you know, are going to continue or propose to draw down a significant amount of energy, they need to account for that, much like Homer City is doing. So there needs to be a balance, I believe, and I think that's going to be a good discussion point. I believe we all agreed on that during the governor's presentation, what those parameters look like, what those guide rails need to be. But again, I think in agreement with the governor, we want to see that come to Pennsylvania. We don't want it to go anywhere else. We want those jobs. We want those opportunities to come to this Commonwealth. So I think that's something that we can unite around.
This is truly a conversation that could go on a long time. I'm glad that we had this time together, though. Representative Struzzi, thank you.
Hey, thank you, Todd. I always appreciate the time.
State Representative Jim Struzzi here on Indiana in the Morning.